Episode 71, Beautifully Defected. Introducing Louise Erskine on the BTS Creative Academy podcast, Uncut. With me, your host, Martin Colton.
Yeah, I didn't look at the stats for a little while. I just was doing it, just practicing and just
crack on.
Just cracking on with it.
The best way.
And just before Christmas time, I looked at the Spotify stats and I was like, oh shit, people are listening. How did that happen?
Yeah, nice.
Can you hear yourself on the headphones? Yeah. So there's a little routine, a little tradition that started with these that we start with. It's kind of strange, I don't know, but it's just something.
I like tradition and I like strange, so I'm here for it.
Okay, cool. So all it is a little clap after three. All we do is go 1, 2, 3, clap, and we begin. Okay. So 1, 2, 3.
Oh, just one.
Just one clap. Just one clap.
Like a whole round of applause.
You can give me a round of applause if you like. But it's just one. It's interesting to see where people go with it.
Yeah. Okay.
But now we're in the podcast. Yes.
It's happening.
So Louise, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. This is really fun. I love this venue.
Yeah. You were saying you used to live nearby, but you didn't know this place was here.
And I mean, when I was driving past like Old Harlow, I was like, how is this right here? Like I used to walk up here all the time. I had no clue.
I like to think of it as a hidden gem of the town.
It literally is. It's beautiful.
Some beautiful things go on here. It's a community space, community theatre.
Especially Harlow is very like 60s boxes of concrete.
Yes.
And this is beautiful old Victorian
building. Yeah, just hiding away.
Nice.
Yeah, because it's a new town. 50s, 60s, it was built. So it's got that very...
It sort of went up quickly, didn't it?
It did, and it's got that very concrete feel to have something like this hidden away in the corner.
No, it's beautiful.
And it's a beautiful place with a beautiful community of people. Like no one works here in this place. Everyone here is a volunteer, including myself when I do stuff here. We just do it for the love of theatre, and we've built this place as a theatre. All of our own blood, sweat and tears, no funding at all.
I think, do you know what? I think the things that you volunteer for, 9 times out of 10, are the things you put the most into. Mm-hmm. Like if you're volunteering for it, it's out of love. It's not out of anything else, is it?
No.
Like I used to have like an Instagram family blog when my children were smaller. And I'm always a bit, like you could deliver here and then I'm a bit like, I need to take it up a notch anyway. But I would find, people would expect this and then I would give this. But then if it was something I was doing for free, I'd be like, yes, all the way up.
Because it's your passion, it's your love, isn't
it? Because if you're going to do it for free, it's something that you're really invested in on like a different kind of personal level than just a job. So it's nice, I love that.
It's strange saying about the job as well, because for me, that transformed then into a job.
Yeah.
It transformed into different career paths and meeting different types of people, and so many things opened.
Fabulous podcast.
And a podcast has come from, I'm blessed to have access to this space where I can have some chairs and
they're nice chairs. I like them.
Comfy. I see them as storytelling chairs.
They
aren't they?
are. Like I feel like if I was little and I had a grandpa, he would sit in the story and I would sit on his lap and he would tell me stories.
Well, this is your story
I've
today.
Never had a grandpa,
this is about you today.
Thank you. Ooh.
So this is Louise's story. I wanted to find out about you. I saw your Instagram. I saw your stuff that you're doing on there. You're such a creative person. You're spreading you send a lot of vibes out there into the world of creativity and positivity.
I definitely
as
try.
well.
I think you go through phases in life, I suppose, don't you, where for a long time positivity is kind of trying to get a handle on and pretending that you don't hurt. And then I think actually you get to a point as you get older, especially, where you're like, I have to go and challenge some of these things in my life and I have to get to grips with them. And actually the most positive thing I can do is acknowledge that there's a lot of negative, and I can take that and I can build with it and I can turn it into something else. And the positivity actually was born from probably the most painful life experience, which is kind of beautiful in its own paradoxical way.
It is, isn't it? It kind of says that we don't have to live in a bad space. We don't have to spend the entirety there.
It's so much more than what it looks like. Even now, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways from the outside life looks not great, but you can you get to frame your own narrative, don't you? The only thing you control really is your own mind
Yeah.
and your own narrative. And if you can actually adjust the way that you think about it and the way that you see it and your perspective, then it can be whatever you want it to be.
Mm-hmm. It's very inspiring what you do, and I want to put a pin in some of the things that you've said there and come back to that, because I don't normally get out my notebook, but I looking on your Instagram, and I was thinking, how does Louise describe herself? She's a writer,
yes,
artist, radio presenter,
yes,
photographer, and Enigma.
Enigma.
that
I
was the bit.
Throw people off. I don't want to just be like too regular about it.
Yeah, definitely. So, where did this? Can we go back to where this creative, inspiring path that you're on at the moment? Where did that kind of start for you?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? I mean, you could argue, I've always been creative, or I've always been this, whatever, and those things are true. But I think where I'm at now started so my youngest son is 6.5-ish now.
He'd probably say 6 3/4.
I mean,
yeah, that's
the months are important at that
they
time
are, aren't
life.
they? Yeah.
Right now, I'm only 38, not basically 38. Do you know what I mean? Like you kind of skew it whichever way.
There's funny bits, isn't there? I'm 39. I keep rounding up. I'm 40. I keep rounding up.
Like when it's a round number. So when I was like going to be 35, I kept saying I'm 35, and I was be like, no, I'm not 35. I think it's just mathematically you get used to rounding the numbers out, and I keep thinking now at 37 like, well, I'm basically 40, and I'm like, no, it's still a while off. Like it's not
so much can happen between now
I
and
can
then.
do anything in 2 and a couple of months.
Yeah, and even then I don't know, is it over at 40?
No, it's beginning.
I hope it's not.
No, it better not be. Goodness me.
Yeah.
I think the only way is up. We're gonna. I think as well. I think if you actually make it, and all of the things that you've spent up to 40 trying to, I think you have like a whole different capacity for it as you get older. And actually, you couldn't pay me to be young again. I am very excited to be getting older, even if it does involve some surreptitious sort of plucking of grey hairs that is getting more
that come along the way. Yeah.
It used to be every now and then. Now most days I'm like, dang, there's another one. So back to the actual question that you asked, and not my greying hair. My son was probably maybe literally just like 2 or 3 months old. I think I'd just put him in his own room, and I'd had to move him into his own room early. My husband at the time was abusive. He was drinking a lot as well. And so where I'd co-slept, I'd had 2 kids very close together, like under 2 years. Not like, I mean, there are people that do it in a year, and I don't know how, like props to them. I don't know how they're still functioning, but two just under 2 years. And I was still getting up in the night with my daughter. And so I was like, I cannot, by the time I get back in bed from dealing with her, I'm going to be getting up again with the baby. So I co-slept with him, but my husband began drinking more heavily while I was pregnant. And so then I was not sleeping at all because I was kind of positioning myself in the middle of the bed instead of the baby in the middle of the bed. So then I'd have to stay awake all night trying to make sure the baby didn't get rolled on by my husband. And it was getting a bit much. So
Sounds like a really tough time.
It was. I mean, I don't think you even have time at the time. I didn't know it was tough. It's minute by minute, and you just kind of handle it. And this is what I can do, and this is what I'm going to handle, and this needs to happen, and this needs to happen, and this needs to happen. And you're so busy surviving that you don't necessarily like process. I think it was much later after I left him and then had the very messy year with him. And after all of that, then I suddenly was like, oh my goodness, like this was a lot. And you finally have time to sort of decompress, and then you get a little bit of time off, and then your brain decides to start healing. And that's when your PTSD kicks in, because it's like, I think I'll let you remember some things now. And that's a whole other thing. But it was one evening that I put the kids to bed, and I had found this blog online, and this woman, she'd essentially kind of made like a 12-steps program, but for people living with people with addiction. And at this point, I was only focused on his drinking. My dad used to drink a lot, still drinks a lot. My stepmom is an alcoholic.
So you
my grandfather
would you
was
say
an
you're
alcoholic.
quite familiar with that then, that you
So,
kind of...
Not intentionally, but I think I was a bit shocked to have become that statistic. You know, like I knew children of alcoholics marry alcoholics because it's what's survivable to you. But I kept kind of coming back to it. Like he didn't really drink when we were first dating, but then very quickly I realized everything about who he was when we were dating wasn't the truth. And it all unraveled very quickly, but I was in it. I got pregnant by accident far too soon when we were very first dating. And, you know, things just kind of built up and then began to unravel very quickly. And by then I just felt trapped. And there wasn't a lot. It was just day by day, survive it. So I was down the side of my bed reading this woman's kind of program, and then I'd read it and I'd kind of go through the steps in the evening and be like, okay, well, I've got the kids and they're out of the way and they're safe, and I started taking a lot of very long baths in the evening. She was like, if you can find a way that's acceptable to your partner to just not be in that environment so that you're not encouraging their behavior, then take yourself away from it. And so the only thing I could really find that was acceptable to him for me to not be with him was, I need to get a bath. So I just started taking like a lot of 2-hour baths in the evening, and then I'd have to. You
needed some space.
I did, and it was one of the steps in the thing was just very clear about like, don't, you know, you can't be saying I'm not comfortable with this environment and then perpetuating it. It was about not enabling. Stop giving them money. Stop doing this. Stop doing that. Don't sit there then and enjoy a nice time with them while they're drinking too much, because that's perpetuating the problem. So I tried to take myself away from it. And I'd gotten out of the bath and I was reading this woman's, like, her actual story, like not just the program that she'd put together. I'd found a blog post that she'd written, and there was this little Bible verse in it, and it was, I'm going to get it wrong now. It was Genesis 50:20, I want to say.
No one's going to test you on this.
There are like keyboard warriors right now as they're watching, and they're like, I will find it is wrong. And it said, you intended it to harm me, but God intended it for good. What is now being done, the saving of many lives. And at that point, I read it, and something in my heart just kind of simultaneously broke and leapt for joy. And I just felt like there is hope in what I am sitting through right now. Yes, I am down the side of my bed, hiding, reading a woman's blog I'm not allowed to be reading, praying my husband doesn't come upstairs, doesn't find me before I'm asleep, or at least pretending to be asleep. And I feel like a child, and I'm like 30 years old. But in that moment, it felt like this can be turned around. And it was a few months before I left him. And then there was a whole very messy stretch for a year after that. But I think that's the moment where, for me, we're now seeing in my work, in my Instagram, and what I share, I think that was the spark that began to ignite. It was that moment where I thought, something in this isn't about me. It can be taken, it can be used. There are millions of women, especially men as well, like abuse is 1 in 6 men across the world that are maybe not hiding down the side of the bed, but metaphorically in this exact same position as I am.
And that's why it's so important, to share.
Exactly that. Brené Brown says that when we share our stories, shame loses its grip of us. And I think I felt like I was born ashamed. And I was so determined. I am not going to die that way. I am going to do whatever it takes, no matter how much it hurts, no matter how deep an excavation of my own soul I have to go through to figure out all of these things and unpack it and turn it into something that means something and that helps people to feel less alone. I'm not naive enough to think I can stop anybody else's pain, heal anybody else's pain, prevent anybody else's pain. But if they can be where I am and know that they are not alone in it, that's all I need.
Well, look at what that blog did for you.
Right.
You discovered you discovered that blog, and it changed your life in that moment, didn't it?
It absolutely did.
What would you have done? How would things be if you hadn't have discovered that blog, that inspiration? Have you ever reached out to that person since? I guess you probably don't even know where to find it, do you?
No, I don't. It was one of those divine things that I just found, and I'd printed it out. I was so nervous that he would find it, and he used to, for a while, we conveniently shared a mobile phone. So he would share my mobile phone, so I couldn't keep anything like that. So I'd printed it quickly on a scrap of paper, and I had it literally under my mattress like a naughty schoolboy. Do you know what I mean? And but there was whatever was written on the bottom of it. I went back and I found the blog with the woman's name and read her story. But yeah, if she hadn't shared her story, if she hadn't been brave enough, and I think she was in a church circle. I think it's very hard. I mean, there are obviously church has a beautiful place in society, but when we look at church as kind of a wider institution, we're used to feeling very cliquey, very judged, very no, I can't tell anybody this or whatever. So I think it took a lot of bravery as well for her to be actually, I'm in this very traditional setting with this very traditional community that she was in, and for her to speak out and say, actually, my life is not what you think it is. It hurts and it's wrong, and I need to do something about it. It took immeasurable bravery from her, and I am very, very grateful for that.
And now you're echoing what she did,
the
aren't you?
butterfly effect, I guess.
Yeah,
and then maybe, you know, if somebody will see what I've done and they'll read what I've done and they'll go, hey, do you know what? If she can help me, I can help someone else. And that's all we can do, is try to pay it forward.
So in this time, were you able to express yourself in any way, or was you very suppressed?
I lost all of that part of me. This was my like second marriage. It was very brief, this one. I got married when I was 21. I don't really know myself at all then. I think I just know, and I think for him as well, I think we both felt lost. And like, if we could just kind of build this thing together that looked like how we felt like life was supposed to look, we'd feel a little bit less like we were drowning in it, which was naive and evidently, obviously, some might say, did not go well. And I first started writing, and I put some like I started reading, you know, like quotes and stuff on Pinterest, and there were these poets. There was like Christopher Poindexter and Tyler Knott Gregson, and I would read their poetry and I'd be like, oh, they like talk how I think. And I was like, this was a revelation for me. And so I wrote some little, like, just poems, really like short micro poems. I think I wrote about 40 of them. I was driving down to Devon to visit my friend, and I kept pulling the car over. I went the back way, you know, where you go past Stonehenge instead of down the motorway.
Yeah. I know.
So it was a quiet journey, like, and so I kept pulling my car over, and I still have it. I found it years later. It was like the inside of a bank statement envelope, you know, with all the blue squiggly lines on, and all these little like and they're all numbered, these little like micro poems, and I put a bunch of them up on Pinterest. And then very soon after that, I started dating who became my second husband, and then entered into that very quickly, was very controlled. I wasn't allowed to wear what I used to wear. I wasn't allowed to do certain things. I had to cover up my tattoos if I was going, you know, like, and so I just lost
yourself
completely. And that, I think my creativity and my self-expression was probably the first thing to go. It was then, well, how do I build his dreams? How do I, you know, help with this? And I was very good at that. Like I really do wife very well. Like, but
you care. It says that you're caring.
Yeah. I think, and I do genuinely find that it's an honor to build something that somebody believes in. To be a part of somebody else's dream is an honor, but you have to be careful that somebody else isn't going to take advantage of that. And it's about building the right people's dreams, and also having them be willing to invest in yours. That has to be like a mutual thing that I think can be very easily lost for a lot of people when you begin to support another human being.
Yeah. So my next question was going to be, how do we protect that moving forward? How do we take what
boundaries are I think the hardest thing to learn, especially when you've grown up not really with an understanding of, I'm allowed to say no, I'm allowed to feel things, I'm allowed to need things. And when you have to learn that as an adult, it takes some time. Like I started in like a really, really silly almost, but it worked. So not that silly, but it felt very silly at the time. And I had to kind of learn that I was worth something. So, and I would just sit in front of the mirror, and I was like, right, I just need to tell myself 3 things I like about myself. And I couldn't even do it on like a personal level. Like right now, you could ask me what I like about myself, and I'll be like, well, like buckle up, because I'm fabulous. Do you know what I mean? And I could list things that I've learned, things that I am good at, strengths that I have, and also weaknesses that I have. Like I'm not completely deluded about it, but I do know what I'm good at now. Whereas at the time, I had to sit there, and the place I started from was, I like my shoulders. That's all I had.
Yeah, it's a start.
But once you can do 1, then you can do 2, then you can do 3. And once you can say 3 things that you like about yourself when you look at yourself, then you can start to say, well, what about who I am? What about actually, all right, this is a mess and I hurt like hell, but I am here and I am surviving, and I must be resilient. And if I'm resilient, maybe I'm also hopeful. And maybe if I'm hopeful, I'm also strong. And maybe if I'm strong, I'm also brave. And these things, you know, they build until eventually you're not just telling yourself in the mirror, you actually believe it in the core of who you are. I have overcome things. I am strong. I am resilient. I am brave. I am hopeful. And hopeful is the bravest part that you can be, I think, because hope is complex, isn't it? It's a double-edged sword. It is, you absolutely need it. And it absolutely hurts most of the time, because you don't hope for what you have. You hope for what you've never had, what you long for, what you're missing. And so you have to hope for it, because you know, if you stop hoping for it, then you stop believing it's possible. And then what have you got to keep you going? But also it makes you acutely aware of, I've not experienced this in my life right now. The truth is, if I were to die tomorrow, I would never know what love felt like, because that's not been my life. I absolutely have to believe that one day I will know that, I will experience that, I will meet somebody and he will have the capacity, or I will have the capacity, we will both have the capacity for each other, for each other's pain and trauma. And like, once you get to this age, it's never going to be uncomplicated, is it? You know, like, and I have PTSD, and I've sort of, you know, I've written a blog on like dating with CPTSD, but again, you have to unpack that further. And actually, and this is the joy of counseling, isn't it? Is how deeply you get to examine your childhood. And the way that your brain is wired, and the way that it's formed, and the time in which you develop your attachment style, and all of these things happen before you're even a year old. So they are so deeply wired in you. But one day I will simultaneously become less all or nothing, because I will adjust to the possibility that life doesn't need that to survive. And simultaneously, somebody else will have the capacity to cope with the fact that I am right now all or nothing, but that I am learning, I am growing, I am trying. You know, and I have to believe that that's possible, although the evidence for it is not currently very strong.
Why is that?
It's just, there has not been.
Just as we're moving forward into those next phases,
as you and the trouble with anything, especially when it comes to like your romantic history being complicated, is that for all of the counseling that you do, for all of the talking that you do, it gets easier as you share it and you talk about it. But there's a lot of things that they just don't come up. You don't remember them. You're not going to be triggered by them. You're not going to have to face them until you're in a situation that makes you, and you don't get to control that.
No.
So it's
I think of these things a bit. Recently, I started thinking of everything like this. I got some similar things to you that resonate with me. And I think of it as like the foundations of you building something, and the early days of your life are like you're building the foundations of your house. You're putting down the cement, you're putting down the mud, the grit. But then as you're getting older, you're starting to put some bricks there. But if some of that like cement is a bit dodgy, then some of the house is going to...
And it's crumbling now.
And it's starting to crumble down in one area. Then you've got to go back. You've got to go back.
You've got to dig it out as well. You can't just pour a bit more on top of it.
Or put another brick there, because it will still it will fall under again. And I kind of got this. I don't know if I heard that on a podcast, because I listen to a lot of podcasts myself.
Love a TED talk as well.
TED talk. So I don't know where I got that from, but recently I'm kind of like I'm picking out that metaphor with everything. And no, it is really important that you share this and you keep talking about this, so that you can find that way to move forward. So if you was to be able to reach someone right now that's going through something similar to what you've described, what is the first thing that they do when they come out of that situation?
If they've already come out of it, or if they haven't come out of it yet, I would say like, don't rush that. I snapped one day. I was very melodramatic. I wrote the time and date down on a little piece of paper, and I slapped it down on the table. We were like snowed in. There was 2 days. He didn't go to work. It was not quite lunchtime. We had 3 children. So I had one son already from my first marriage, who would have been 7. Then I had an almost 2-year-old and a newborn. And everybody wanted something. I was trying to feed the baby. I had him in like one hand shoved up my jumper, trying to prepare lunch for the other 2 and for my husband. And my hands were full, and everyone, when is it ready? And when kids just need things all the time, they were all at me. And he just sat down and cracked a beer. And I was like, you could help. Like, how do you consistently sit there and say how much you love people, and then you don't do anything when you can see them struggling like this? And this was the thing that I think I constantly struggled with, is the lack of matching between actions and words in our relationship. And I snapped. And I'm sometimes grateful for that. Like, it's not smart when you're in an abusive relationship, but that little bit of like fire in me could never quite be extinguished. And I snapped, and it was naive and I wouldn't recommend it, but I slapped this piece of paper and I said, I'm calling it time of death, like whatever it was. And I was melodramatic about it. It was and then we were stuck together for another day in the house before he could even go to work. And it was a while.
But you forced the situation, because there is something in being stuck in this limbo.
It's really,
it's
really
another day. You can always leave something till tomorrow.
You can. And especially when you're used to surviving, especially, like it used to be, it's fight or flight, and it's not. It's fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop. And for most of us, it's fawn. We're going to make you our friend, because if you're my friend, you won't hurt me. And so you're so embedded in this pattern of, I can please you and I will be safe. It's just habit, and it's trauma bonding as well. Like that's really important, is that people understand that trauma bonding is an addiction. It does the same thing in your body as any kind of alcohol or drug dependency. Like, so when it's great, you get this high and then you get this low, but also when it's gone, even though it was horrible, you need it back again. And you have to break that the same as you. And that's really, really hard. And a lot of people judge for how people go back. I spent the next year, despite having left him, trying to do anything I could to please him and make it better. Because of this trauma bonding. And that took a long time to break. What's funny, not funny, but kind of funny in an ironic sense, is the thing that surprised me most is actually one of the really basic ways that you can begin to break that is to drink more water.
Okay.
Which seems nuts, right? But I learned this, and I was like, well, that I can do. And I think because it feels so overwhelming to think, well, I just have to cold turkey, never have this, never do this. But when you're in that situation, your hormones are in this overproductive kind of state. So where you should release one chemical and then it should hit the next kind of gland down and activate that one, which should shut the next one off, and things should be in balance. When you have this constant overproduction of adrenaline, of cortisol, of epinephrine, and all of the stress, panic, survival hormones, they just keep flooding your body over and over again, and it's just compounding itself and making it worse. And actually, the very simple way that I started to do that was to go, actually, I have learned if I drink more water, I can help my body to flush and reset its own chemical imbalance. And then once I've got a control on the physical side of it, then I'll attempt to emotionally, mentally unpack, figure out, heal from.
Okay.
But yeah.
So I'm aware that if I've got any questions, by the way, that are insensitive, or it'd be completely shut me down and tell me that because I'm coming from a very unexperienced place with this. So tell me if it's not anything you want to talk about, or if we're going down places. I'm really grateful for you sharing. But what I think when you're in a situation like that, do you start rationalizing lots of excuses?
Yes, immediately. Very early on, the first time that he wasn't physically abusive. That wasn't the main thing that he would do. Mostly it was predominantly emotional, financial, sexual abuse. There were times when it was physically abusive. And the first time was right after he moved in. So I lived with my dad. When I was married, the first time I lived in Northern Ireland, and the recession hit very, very hard over there. So we'd moved over here and we were staying with my dad while we looked for work. And my husband, my first husband, is complicated when you've had this many. You can't just say my husband. I feel like I have to keep
you have to number them.
Clarifying. I've really overachieved in certain areas. So he came over here to work for my dad, whose main guy who'd gone off sick. And while we were looking for things or whatever, our relationship, I think me being home actually meant I had maybe a little bit more confidence to say, this isn't working actually. Now that I look at it, I thought, when I was in Ireland, I was like, maybe it's just that we're not in the right place, or that this isn't that, or whatever. Or it's because I don't really have anybody. But actually, the problems were all still there when I was back here, and I had all of my people. So then that didn't work out, but we were staying with my dad. So then I still live with my dad, my poor dad. I moved in temporarily with one small child. Now there's 3 of them and I ain't gone nowhere. But that is what it is. I'll take care of him one day.
I bet he appreciates it. Does he like you? I bet he likes you being there.
I think it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? It's noisy and it's messy. And he always says, like, when we move out, he'll have maybe 2 weeks where he goes, oh, it's so calm and quiet and clean. And then after that, he'll have a panic attack and be like, why is it so quiet and calm and clean? And where are all the people? Can I come live with you? Like, I think as well, where like he wasn't really in my life when I was young, there has been an aspect of him being there for my children that I think has actually been very healing for all of us. It's almost like getting a do-over. Like, as much as it's difficult for my pride that I can't provide them with all of the things that I feel like I should, and that my dad has had to do it. Actually, then I think for him, it has been very restorative of the fact that he wasn't there to do it when I was a child. And that, you know, he is my youngest son, especially, he would be like, you know, if they have to make a Father's Day card in school or whatever, he straight up refused. He'd be like, no, but I'll make one for Granddad. You know, like, and so there's been some really beautiful things that have come from it. And I am grateful for it. As difficult as
it does sound like there is beautiful things in healing, isn't there? And
there are. It's full
and the
circle.
there's this echoing effect that goes on, isn't there?
I think so many things come round full circle, and it's funny when you see them because you didn't realize beforehand, and then you look at them, and then it makes you wonder about some of the bigger things in life when you see it in a small thing. Like, I don't do the Instagram stuff and all of that anymore in terms of like the family blog, but I went to the DVD release, I think, of Mrs. Lowry and Son, I think it was called, something like that. It was a film about the life of Ellis Lowry, and they brought it out. It was a British film, independent film, and when they were bringing it out, they invited me to an art class that was run by the guy who'd done all of the paintings for the film. And it's funny in terms of creativity, actually, and then literally like a couple of weeks later, my mum was clearing out her loft, and she found this picture that I'd done in primary school of Ellis Lowry's Matchstick Men.
Oh, wow.
And it was
so
like,
there's a connection,
and I had no idea, but it was, and then I remembered doing it in the class, and it was that teacher that I had then that first recognized the sort of creativity in me. And he took me out. I went out and I had extra art lessons instead of doing some of the other stuff in class. And I got to paint like the school wall and all of this like stuff. And I'd completely forgotten about all of it. And then I was like, how funny that that's come all the way around so many years later in this moment. And then you sort of start to wonder how much else in life, some of the things that we look and we're boggled by, and we just think, what is that? And it doesn't make any sense. And then sometimes I try to allow space for, well, when I get 5 months past it, 6 months past it, a year past it, am I going to look back at it and then see something from before and go, actually, I needed that. And I just had no idea at the time. It's hard to see it when you're in it.
Yes,
but I do believe it
and
has a way.
Yeah, and when you're in it, it can be really tough. And I had a thing recently of losing a couple of friends and that was a bit of a tough time.
Yeah, that's
excruciating. Excruciating. But then when you look back on that, you go, that was really, really important for me. Like when you look at how the situation's moved on, you go, that was something that I needed to have complete separation from, because otherwise other things would have happened to me. But you can't see that at the time. You can't see the positive at that time, can you, when it's dark and when it's not good? When
you just miss them, and you have to grieve the loss. Even when it's something that you need to lose, I think you still, too often we're like, well, no, I can't grieve that as a loss because it was terrible and it had to go. But it's deeper than that. And a lot of the time you have to grieve what it should have been, or what you were told it was going to be, or what you believed it could be. Whatever that is, it's a dream, it's a hope. It's the idea, especially when it's a friend or it's a relationship. Because my friends are like my family. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely, yeah.
My best friend.
They're your tribe.
Like, she feels like home to me. Like, so when it's not that, but you thought it was, like, there's a loss. And even if it's a good loss, you can still hurt over it. And I think too often we don't allow ourselves to hurt over things because we think we shouldn't, instead of acknowledging that actually we do, and we need to grieve. Yeah.
I'm just taking a moment because I'm taking so much from this. It's amazing sitting down and having these conversations and talking to someone that's had this journey, and you've come out on the other side of it. It's like you've found this way to almost like have a rebirth.
I am trying. Do you know what's funny? I am going to get a phoenix tattoo on this arm. That is my plan.
Yeah. That's
I
that's
just
what
need tattoo money.
that's yeah. That's what. Do you know what? That's exactly what you're resonating, the phoenix.
I
You're
think the thing
resonating
with
that.
it is as well is we have this, a phoenix, like how beautiful it gets reborn, but actually it burns as well.
Yes.
And
yeah.
it's the acknowledging that it is not comfortable or pain-free to burn, but something really beautiful can come out of it.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, so the phoenix is rising. But so I want to get to how creativity, how your writing, how your poetry, how your artistry, how that's propelled you forward.
I think, if nothing else, at its most basic form, being able to write it out. Like I can't journal. Like a lot of people journal, and I think it takes actually a huge amount of bravery to journal and to put all your innermost thoughts and feelings kind of roughly in the moment down on a piece of paper. And it's widely acknowledged how incredibly powerful and how incredibly healing this is. I can't do it. It's too vulnerable. And I think that that's true for a lot of people, and we're very used to, I think in Western society especially, like holding it all in. We bury things. That is quite common, especially for men more so actually, you can't do this, you can't feel this, you can't be this, you have to just be strong and brave and tough and emotionless and all of the things, and we bury.
I did that for a long time.
Right, especially when it's your survival setting, your default is just to crack on and do the next thing, and that's how you survive.
I would say 35 up until from 20 to 35. That's what I did. Just buried it, and I had children quite young as well. 21. Got 2 teenagers now, 18 and 15.
Nice.
And to raise them up, I had this preconception that I couldn't be weak.
Yeah.
That there were good times in there and things like that, and they are wonderful kids. But yeah, I suppressed any bad things down, and just pushed it
And
down.
that's very, very normal, especially in the culture that we live in.
Because I was the man. I felt that's what I had to do.
The idea of just writing all of those things down on a piece of paper where anybody could pick up that book and find it, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
But I think if you can take that down and make it smaller and more manageable, and you can write it with metaphor, it makes it more accessible in some ways. So I have a workbook on my website where you can, it's just like a free download, but it's called Processing Your, originally it was called Processing Your Trauma Through Poetry. I think I just made it more generic and like healing through poetry or whatever. But essentially the idea is, and I have spaces like in my books, every now and then there'll just be like a note page, and there'll be like a word and a definition, and there'll be like a writing prompt. And the idea is that, I think especially for me, as I read poetry, when you read a poetry book, you tend to it's bite-sized pieces, but you often devour it. You can read that in 2 hours on a bus ride, on a train ride, whatever it is that you're doing. But the whole point of poetry is that it makes you feel something, and 9 times out of 10, it makes you feel something painful or hopeful, but then that hopeful thing can spiral into well, why am I hoping for this? It's because I don't have it, and that hurts. And it can feel like a lot, and it's on top of you. And I think if you can take that and just put it in front of you so you can look at it rather than feel underneath it, then it changes your perspective a little bit. And it's a really tiny little perspective change, but if you can be in the habit and you can learn to write that way, then that can be incredibly powerful for you unlocking the way that you feel about things. And so I have these kind of challenges in there. But it'll be just and when I've run a workshop this way, I don't expect somebody to come into a poetry workshop and just put all of their trauma out there. So all we do is say, this is your prompt word. It might be bird. Just write me a sentence about a bird. Doesn't matter how regular a boring sentence that is. All I want you to do is write me a sentence about a bird. So you sit there and they'll be like, I can see a bird in my garden. That's a sentence about a bird. Okay, well now write that sentence again, but include, and there's different ways you can take it, include metaphor, include feeling, include a thought, include an adjective. It depends on your group or whatever. But so then they might take, I'm sitting in my garden and I can see a bird, to I can see a bird and I can't help but wonder if it feels free. And to put some kind of, and if you can get into a habit of writing about something that way and to unpacking it, and then you can make it bigger again. And then the last challenge is actually, can you make it smaller again? Because writing a micro poem is more challenging than writing a mid-sized poem, because you have to like delete all of these things out of it to make this like one like really powerful punch. There's a quote somewhere and it says something like, "I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter, I didn't have time to write a short one." And it's that, like, it actually takes a lot more. And so it's if you can cultivate writing about normal things in this way and just kind of to practice it, then you can begin to use it, and you can begin to say, well, actually, why was my thought about that bird? I wonder if it's free. Is it because I feel trapped? Is that why that's where my brain took it? And then, well, what if I think about that? What is it in my life that's making me feel trapped? Is it a relationship? Is it my circumstances? Is it this like day-to-day just trying to put enough food on the table, trying to survive, cost of living crisis, constant tearing in all directions that makes me feel like I'm not enough? And you can begin to, but if you can look at that in front of you on a page, instead of just having it all in your mind and weighing you down, it loses a little bit of its power of you, and it feels a little bit more like you can get a handle on it. And for me, I've written some incredibly personal, private, vulnerable things in poems that I absolutely could not have written in a journal. This is what happened. This is how he did this, But essentially, I'm still processing those same moments, those same feelings, those same emotions, but in a way that feels safer to me. And if it feels safer to me, then I got the odds that there are going to be other people out there that if they can learn to write this way, then that's going to feel safer to them as well. And maybe one day I'll be able to journal, and maybe they will too. But maybe we won't have to.
Yeah, maybe you won't have to. It sounds to me like you've found the thing that works for you.
That's exactly it. You just have to.
I think we've all got different. I think our brains work in different ways. I don't think there's one way of thinking, one way the neurons all connect. It's all going to be very different, isn't it, for all of us? I had a thing
literally, maybe it was like yesterday. And I think it's something like when you're an adult, you develop something like 700 neurons per day. Whereas when you are an infant, you're developing as many as, I think it's like 20,000 per second.
Wow.
So when you think about if your life is hard when you're a baby, and all of the neurons in your brain are developing at that rate, how much is being put into you that needs to be unpacked, that needs to be rewired, that needs to be like,
so through
amount.
We're through the poetry, you're rewriting the neurons.
Literally, like taking a situation. And I think as well, if it's painful, but you can make it beautiful in its own way. I don't know, like, and everybody's different. Like, this is what I do is absolutely not for everybody, but it will be for some people. And I think I want those people to know that it's an option for them, that it's helped me, that it's a way that helps me to feel, I think, less weighed down is the best way I can kind of describe it. I wouldn't say I felt freer. I maybe a little. I don't think
you come across as free. You come across as free here and now, talking about that, talking about your journey.
Practice, I think, isn't it? The more you discuss the things, the more you're honest about the things, the easier they are.
The easier it gets for you.
And the less of a hold they have over you, because you're not ashamed of them anymore. Because if I'm helping somebody, that's not shameful. If I'm hiding, that is shameful. That feels shameful. And so then it's making that switch within myself. Actually, because I'm not hiding it anymore, it allows me to be free, even though it's difficult, even though it's not what I would wish.
So you mentioned Brené Brown.
Brené Brown, yes.
Brené Brown, sorry. I'm terrible with pronunciations. But you mentioned her, and she's a great advocate for this stuff. Is there anyone else that you've come across along the way that's been that you've found an inspiration?
There are like so many books that I have loved. And some of them, I will say, are very much above my intellectual pay grade. But in terms of, especially if you have trauma.
What do you mean by that? Sorry, but above your intellectual pay grade, right?
Not that I'm not smart. Like I actually am a very intelligent human being. But things like somebody like Peter Levine, who's a psychologist, who will write papers that are published. A lot of that, from a learning perspective, is just straight over my head. But when you get to the parts in that, especially I listen to them as audiobooks, I don't think I could sit down and just read that amount of like scientific information. But when you get to the parts where the case studies are, and you hear how somebody else, like this, and then you kind of go, oh my goodness, that's incredible. And it's not even about anything I've been through or whatever, but actually it's demonstrating that traumatic memory can be registered in your human brain as far back as the second trimester of pregnancy. So, and you learn things like that, and then that blows your mind. And then but that has nothing to do with me. This was about a baby with a traumatic birth experience, this particular one that I'm thinking of, and how he helped him to kind of complete something that was missing because he'd had this traumatic birth experience, and it completely changed his life physically. The baby had like really intense reflux, and the doctors kept prescribing things, and then they wanted to give him surgery. And as in a desperate bid, his mother took him to this psychologist, and he talked about the birth experience or whatever. And he said, and eventually he kind of determined that what's happening with these spasms that he's having is the acid reflux is a result of these spasms that he's having, not the other way around. And what he's doing is he's pushing his legs in the same way that he did during birth, but during birth it caused the cord to wrap around his neck. And so all he's trying to do is complete something that should have happened. And he, as a psychologist, took him through this and allowed him to complete those motions. And instead of telling him, no, don't do that, you're causing yourself stomach problems, he told him, good boy, you're doing really, really good. Yes. And when he would push him away, he would tell him, good boy, you're setting boundaries, keep pushing. And literally within like 2 sessions, this baby suddenly, almost like a newborn, turned around and nuzzled into his mother in a way that he had never done. The acid reflux stopped, all of these things. And this is tracing memory back so far before we're even aware that it could possibly affect us, but it's built in there. And so those kind of things, I love all of those things, although I don't fully understand all of them. But when you're listening,
well, that was what I was gonna
stories like that.
I was going to ask, what is your takeaway from this?
I think it's one. I think if you're like, well, if that's in that very practical situation, and then I can look at my life and say, well, actually, while my mom was pregnant, her life was very traumatic. And maybe I can allow myself just a little grace for the fact that trauma changes your DNA.
Forgiveness.
Right? Like, I think it's important to have grace and grit, isn't it? And I think sometimes we get so caught up in the grit that we forget to allow ourselves grace. And there's so much of it that is outside of our control. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to unpack and to heal from once you become an adult. So like my mom's life was incredibly traumatic. It was very difficult. Her whole life was traumatic. So if trauma can change your DNA, then you give your trauma change DNA to your child. That's a cycle. And actually, so these things, I don't have a full grasp of them, but I am learning and I find them fascinating and I absolutely love them. So Peter Levine is one like that. There's also a really fascinating book. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. And that, again, is about, when I first went to counseling, my counselor, she would say to me, like when we were talking about traumatic memory or something, she would say, I see that's affected you. Where in your body can you feel it? And I just think, she's nuts. Are we sure I should be taking advice from this woman? But actually, there came a point where I realized if I'm talking about my sexual trauma, I have a stabbing pain in my kidneys. And for a long time, I couldn't sleep on my front. I had chronic upper back and neck pain that I'd had on and off to a degree, but that really compounded itself during especially that second marriage. And then probably 8 months into counseling, I woke up one morning on my front and realized I'd woken up on my front every day for a week with no pain. And that was psychological pain. That wasn't muscle trauma. That was emotional trauma that's stored. And as you begin to release it and heal from it and understand it and unpack it, your brain is like a filing cabinet. It doesn't go anywhere. But once you understand it, you get to file it properly instead of having it be this disorganized, messy desk where things can jump out at you and fall off the table at any given moment. And so once I began to do that, my body began to heal. And also there was one of the case studies in that, it was looking at car crash victims, and the ones that had flashbacks, and they put them in an MRI machine and then tried to trigger and then did trigger a flashback. So they would describe the scene or whatever. And so they noticed what they weren't expecting is that the center of your brain that controls speech would go completely white. and that it would just go offline. It would shut down in the MRI and stuff like that. So I remember I'd had an argument with a friend, and all I desperately want, because this is my sort of previously codependent kind of, I need to fix it. I need to pick it. All I desperately wanted was to have the conversation with him that meant I could fix it. But he called me, and all I can remember is I felt like pinned against the bathroom wall. And all I could say was, I just can't. And it was almost like out of body. But then, and it made no sense, because all I wanted to do was have the conversation.
Can't mean? You can't.
There's literally, I physically, and I couldn't think even what is happening. It wasn't even a conscious, I just couldn't have the conversation right then. And it wasn't even like I'm not emotionally capable. I physically couldn't. But then once you see this MRI thing and you're like, well, hang on a minute. When they're triggered, their ability, your whole brain's speech section shuts down. And then I'm like, well, this is why. Like, I haven't been in a car accident, but I was triggered, and I do have PTSD, and my brain shut down. And this makes sense to me now. It's a very different situation, but because I've heard this person's story and the results of that person's story, it helps me to understand myself in a different way. And there's also another really good book. I mean, anything Brené Brown wrote, realistically, but also Oprah Winfrey wrote a book with a childhood trauma psychologist, and I can't remember his name, but it's called What Happened to You? So, and this is about the changes in mental health and mental health practice, especially, where they had this shift from no longer asking what's wrong with me, so what happened to you. The question isn't what's wrong with you. All right, maybe like when you, especially if you've like PTSD and you're triggered, and there's a story they tell in it like about a soldier, and he's been back from like Vietnam for 30 years and a motorbike backfired, and he had just started dating somebody new, and he said they were walking down the street, they were arm in arm. He really, really was invested in this relationship, like it was the first time in a long time. And he said the next thing he knew, he was on the floor between two cars, hands over head, screaming.
I've seen it from an ex-soldier, where I popped a champagne bottle on New Year's Eve, and my friend who'd got back from Iraq 2 years ago on the ground. Yeah. Like back in that moment.
Because your brain is adaptive, and it's learned this is how you survive. And so your brain is like a pyramid, and the cortex is like the top, the thinking and all of the things, and then the basic things that are controlled by your brain, your breathing, your digestive function, and the things that aren't conscious are in the bottom. But when you have no link between the two, because this adaptive part of your brain, the survival part of your brain, has learned you drop to the floor, there isn't time for that information to go through the stages and get to your thinking, oh, that's a champagne. This is how I survive, and this is your body does what the bottom part of your brain tells it to do without letting it filter up to like reasonable, rational thought. And people don't, I think when you begin to learn the science of it, it feels more acceptable. And you can allow yourself, you can go, well, this is how the human brain works. It's not that there's something wrong with me. This is how my brain works. It was designed to do this way. And actually, in the right season, this kept me alive. There's not something wrong with me. It's just that the thing that happened to me is now still affecting me, and I have to learn to unlearn it and to deal with it in a different way.
You've almost got to like break out of the survival mode, haven't you? You've got to there's some work to do.
There's a lot of work to do, especially when you've grown up
in
survival mode. And that's your fundamental kind of default. If you've been in a difficult childhood, if you've been neglected, if you've been abused, if you've had, even like there's an interesting case study on like the parents' divorce and the actual trauma that is for children when they're at certain ages, when they're young especially, because they don't see parents as individual people. Parents are like they're a one thing. So then there's this like tearing. And I mean, it's very hard to listen to. I cried. I cried all the tears. Like, my children have been through this, and I know I did the right thing. But at the same time, there's me knowing I did the right thing doesn't negate the loss for them of what that should have been or how much it could hurt them to have their parents be like that, And the same kind of goes for with like arguing when your children are small, and the way that it impacts them isn't the way that you think it impacts them, because you have rational thought and they don't. And so it's very, very complex.
I keep trying to remind myself that with my teenagers.
They won't have fully formed rational thought till they're 30.
No, especially,
it's a long way off.
yeah, and even then, some adults still they haven't.
They have less excuse.
Like we say, it
Their
takes
brain
work.
Is fully formed.
Yeah, but it takes work
It
though.
does,
So
yeah.
even though the
It really
brain
does,
is,
and you
is
have to make
formed.
that choice. Like you have to genuinely commit to being a lifelong learner. I think a lot of people are like, I'm out of school and I'm out of college and that's it now. Like, no, you have to keep learning until you die. Like there's no other way to thrive in life, I don't think. Whether that's I'm going to learn about my craft, my thing that I do, this industry, just some random hobby, something like that I can apply myself to, but that's how you keep your brain healthy. And I'm also going to learn about myself. And I'm going to learn about why I am the way I am and whether I like that or whether I need to change that. Else it's a lot.
Yeah. What I see from you as well is vulnerability. You give a lot. You're really showing who you are. Where does that fit within everything that you do?
I think there's a podcast I watch sometimes called The Basement. And he says on it, like, vulnerability is my superpower. I think I would agree. Like, it is difficult and it is scary. And it's easier like this than it is in a personal relationship. Because this is very purposeful vulnerability, and it's also vulnerability that's in some ways practiced because I'm used to talking about the things as much as new things often come up because you're talking to a different person. My experience talking to you is going to be completely different and it's going to bring different things out. And that's beautiful, but also sometimes surprising. But it's harder to be vulnerable on a one-to-one like relationship in your personal, like in your kind of everyday life, I think. And I'm still working on that. But I have noticed I lost somebody recently. It broke my heart completely, but I can look back at it and say, actually, it didn't work out. And it hurts. It still hurts. And it's been months, but it still hurts. But I was absolutely the bravest I have ever been. And I didn't hide. And I didn't like shy away from the difficult conversations when he wanted to have them as much as I was like, oh my God, no. Like I sat out and I was honest, even when I knew it was not what he wanted to hear. And that took a lot. And I can say that's how I can see I'm growing. As much as it hurts, I can look back at that and say, no, I was the most me I have ever been. I just wasn't the most me I've ever been with the right person.
Yes, yeah. So you may want something in a moment, but it doesn't mean that it's right for you.
And it's them as well, like even for all of the good, and we had like the way that we could talk to each other was the most exceptional thing I have ever experienced in my entire life. But at the same time, it's not just me and my journey. He has his trauma and his journey, and whether or not he's ready to deal with all of that. And you have to both be in the same space where you're both ready to, and I think maybe I'm just a little further along in being able to face it. And so it's not even, wrong person, wrong time, any of that. That's all very trite. But actually, I'm at a stage where I know it's going to hurt, but I want to face it anyway. Whereas I think before that, the stage before that is I want to face it, but I want to face it in a way that just feels better and doesn't hurt. And then you kind of try that for a while and you realize that's not actually sustainable. You have to, it's like your concrete. You have to dig it out. You have to jackhammer it and break it up and dig it out. You can't just neatly sort of pet it a little bit and hope for the best. But we go through phases, and I think it is devastating, but it also does affirm that I am where I am, and I'm proud to be where I am, even if it's not a space I've met somebody else that's ready to be there yet. But
that's a really important thing.
Situation again,
yeah,
doesn't
it's
it?
so important to recognise that. So where does it fit within your art?
My art is...
Because that takes a lot to be vulnerable in your art. We've
harder.
talked about how you're bearing your soul within your poetry.
Yeah.
You're telling the world what your thoughts are, what your journey's been. You could put that out there, and you don't know what the response is going to be.
No,
do you?
You don't. You absolutely don't. I would say I've been very lucky. I'm sure there are plenty of people online, keyboard warriors, that absolutely hate me. but they haven't.
Why do you think that?
Well, because no, I'm not for everybody. I don't want to be for everybody. You know, like this is one of the things.
You put a post yesterday, didn't you, about something similar? But what did it say?
I can't remember.
It said something like, I'm not for everybody.
I was probably
like
about not being too much, I think.
That was the one, yeah.
Yeah. Like sometimes I think we have this kind of default where we want everyone to like us, right? But when you break it down to its like most basic, if you were sat in a room with Hitler and Mother Teresa and they both really liked you, like who the heck are you? Do you know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, there's a lot of people in this world. I would be very honored for them to not like me. Like, and I think once you get past that and actually you're like, I'm okay with the fact that I am for a certain number of people. There are people who love me. I am a bit of a Marmite human being. People adore me completely. And other people, literally like, and when we're supposed to be, imagine if we all just liked each other or all just hated, like life would just be very boring. And the joy in life is discovering your people and finding them and building your own family, building your own community, building whatever it is that you need to build for your soul to feel like it's home or it has somewhere to belong and to make that for other people. That is joyful. But actually a lot of it is nope. Oh my goodness, you! Like, yes, you've got this kind of vision. I can see that in you. Let's find a project together. Let's sit down and talk about it on a podcast. Let's, like those are the people. And then it's joyful to find them. But it is joyful to find them because they're rare. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. But important as well.
So important. They're diamonds. They literally are.
Yeah. So what's next for you then? Where are you going next? We know you.
To the top.
Yeah. What does the top look like?
I don't know. It's an unraveling, isn't it? Like I have dreams and I have ideas, and there are things that I.
Go on. What's the dream? What's the dream?
Achieve. The dreams are the very vulnerable things that I've never told anybody. I have some dreams. You know what? Actually, I would really love to have like a show on Netflix.
Okay.
Sometimes I think this life and my kids. And, I don't even like reality TV, but actually I think in a similar way to the writing, to the talking, and actually it started this person that I lost. It started the thought and that kind of dream in me started because I said to you, like the way that we could talk to each other was exceptional. And sometimes I would think like if people could just be like a fly on the wall for this conversation, like that would change a lot. And it opens people's, and I think actually that is a...
So what would that, because we're going back to hope, aren't we? When we're talking about dreams. Like, so you have a show on Netflix. Yeah. The show, and you say
not necessarily Netflix. That's just
Yeah. You have
other services are available.
you have a platform where
I think it's that. It's like I notice for me as well. It's that when we share ourselves, we help people heal. And so when they have an idea of you and who you are and what you do, but there is something about seeing somebody's life and the way that they rebuild it, or the way that they handle it, or the way that it kicks them when they're down and then they have to figure it out, that is very, very engaging. And I think that I'm not like, there's a lot of very superficial reality TV that's very...
I want to say inspiring.
Showy, but I'd like it to be something real, but also creative. Like, do you remember that show? I think it was Escape to the Chateau. Like an element of that. Like that was technically a reality show, but they also had these incredible creative projects they were getting on with. Like if you could blend that with something with a bit more real life in it, that would be my dream.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how are we going to get there? How's that going to...
I'm going to do lots of podcasts.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah. And what about...
If I knew how to make it happen, it would be here already.
What about your own podcast? You're on the radio, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What kind of radio station is this?
It's a Chelmsford Community Radio.
Okay.
104.4 FM online and in the CCR app.
Is that the jingle? Is it?
That's the standard line that I like to put out there.
Okay.
I started that in July, and I absolutely love radio. It's I have a Monday lunchtime show, so it's not an interview show. Sometimes I've covered for other people and done interview shows, and I love interview shows. But I also really like that my show is, I get to bring some joy into people's day, and I'll have a chat and I do my links, or play certain music. And I'll take some requests or whatever, and people will text me sometimes about something, or, you know, but it's that kind of, it almost feels like a companionship thing, you know, like, and I think it again comes back to that. I just would, if I can speak out across the airwaves or whatever it is into somebody's day in a way that makes them feel like they have a friend and that they're not alone. Like, it's a very different way of doing it, but it's also kind of the same thing. And I love having the different ways to do that and to reach people. And it is genuinely joyful. I dance a lot. I only play songs I like. Which is the freedom of community radio, isn't it?
Yes,
I say I take requests, but if you ask me to play something I don't like, I will not do it.
So where can you hear this? Where can we listen in?
Is it on
online?
Right.
Okay.
Wherever you've got, like, Alexa play Transfer Community Radio.
Right.
And
okay.
she absolutely will.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely have a
That's
listen.
fun, and you should come on.
Yeah.
You can come and co-present a show with me. It's fun. I've had a couple of friends. Well, I don't really do an interview show, but so I'll have them come on for like the whole 2 hours, and we'll literally chat like this.
Right. Okay.
In the links, but we'll have longer links and less music.
Yeah. No, let's do it. Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah. No, I'm very, very open to that. Open to new things. You know, it's strange actually. Before I started this isn't something that I would consider doing. I think
those are the best things.
Yeah, I'd have never considered myself someone to be open and vulnerable and having a conversation, like having an open conversation.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to throw myself into saying yes more. In fact, I did one of these last night with a friend that I haven't seen in about 10 years.
Magic.
Which was beautiful, catching up with him after 10 years. And you're like, why haven't I seen you in 10 years? Like, how was that?
There's so much to unpack.
Yeah, how has that happened? But we sat down last night, and there was this discovery in this conversation that saying yes to things is important, and being open to new things is
right. Like, I only just started radio, and I wouldn't have expected to discover at this age something that I love so much that I had never even in my wildest dreams thought, oh, I'll be like a radio presenter. Like, no, it happened by accident, and I fell into it, and I absolutely adore it. And that is so joyful. Like, discovering new things. Life requires adventure. Like, I read somewhere that that's how you make a relationship work. I mean, not obviously it has to be a certain level of basic human decency involved, which I have been lacking. But in the beginning, everything's an adventure because you're discovering things together. And then they say that, you know, especially people tend to they like to go to a certain place on holiday, and they like to do this, and they realize actually sometimes you have to go out together and do something you're probably both going to hate, because that in itself is the experience that will bond you and unite you and keep the adventure going. And so I would like a life of adventure. Whatever that looks like. That's my word of the year for 2024 is adventure. The year of adventure. The start of new things for you. Yeah, and that's not necessarily, I mean, I'm going to go to Albania. Okay. Which I'm excited about for my birthday. My birthday for once is not in the Easter holidays. So it's cheap to go somewhere for my birthday as opposed to like makes you want to cry and is completely unachievable. So my oldest son and I are going just for like 3 nights. So there's that kind of adventure, but I'm also aware that this in and of itself, this right here, what we're doing, that's an adventure. Yeah, we don't know where well, going back to when I started this, like I didn't know where this would take me. No. I didn't know you. You still don't know where this is. No, and I didn't know you before today, and I've done like 70 of these now, and big numbers. Sitting down with like 70 individuals and having conversation lists, and the impact of that's had on me. How different they are, and who those people are, and I think it's a beautiful thing because you wouldn't necessarily be friends with all of those people. No. But I always say, like, you can't hate anybody up close. Like, no matter how fundamentally you disagree with somebody, when they're like over there, when you sit them down next to you and you talk to them, you can't hate them. Even if at the end of the conversation you still fundamentally disagree with everything that they stand for, you cannot hate somebody. And the world is built on so much hatred that is predicated by distance. We keep people away. It's them versus us. It's they, it's this. It's, you know, like when we stop seeing people as human, it's like when you look through history at dehumanizing words that were used, you know, and policemen are pigs and they called black people monkeys, or people get called rats, or, you know, like, or pussy is the one that annoys me as a woman. It's dehumanizing, and it's there for a reason. It's not just slang. Like, it's an intentional distancing to create hatred, Because if you look at somebody that's different to you and you can say them as a person, all right, I don't like what you stand for, I don't like who you are, any of that, but I also can see that you're a mother, that you're a father, that you're a son, that you work hard, like, then you can't hate them because they're a human being. And so this like distance is, it's interesting, but this conversations that you have with all of these different people, they open up like to the people that are then watching and thinking, well, I disagree with everything that guy said, but also that was still an interesting thing, and that made me think about some stuff. And it, no matter, like, distance is, it's got a lot to blame for distance, I think, but it's an important tactic, but it's closing that distance. And
I do feel like that's what this is doing. And in fact, yesterday, someone on social media, a keyboard warrior, had something negative to say about one of the guests on the podcast. And when I saw it, I was upset for the person that had come on because he was a friend. But then when I sat back and I reviewed it, I said to him, "Look, this is debate.
yeah,
It's opened a conversation.
Exactly
Get involved with the conversation. Don't just sit back. Like, yeah, let's talk about this. That person disagrees what we've said. Let's continue talking about it. Let's find out if there's some middle ground here."
And I think we have to let go of our need to be right. Because 9 times out of 10, nobody's actually right. It's just that you feel right.
Yeah, or an opinion in that situation.
Right, and there's some, even when there are ways where you feel like this is very clearly right and that's very clearly wrong. When you go to, it's kind of like with the childhood trauma and unpacking all of the things. If you could take that keyboard warrior, and I read a thing the other day and it said, to understand the oak, we must go back and look at the acorn. If you look at them and you stop thinking of them as why they just this hateful troll on the internet, well, why literally why are they doing this? And people become people and they become interesting again. And I think if you can open the conversation, even if it starts off from a place that, and some people are just looking for an argument, and you can't
they need the attention,
engage with them.
Yeah.
But the fact that they were listening then and they commented and they hate it, they're listening the next time. So you've got them, whether even when they hate you, you're still opening their mind and creating thought and planting seed. And that you never know when that's going to come back. Some seeds stay in the ground for years before they grow. Bamboo seed is in the ground for 3 years before it shoots. It's the slowest seed, I think, that there is. But then it's also the fastest growing plant. Like, you can't ever you can't predict when these things are going to be. But that person disagreed and they had something to say about it, and that they were obviously paying enough attention to go online then and comment on something. They didn't even comment, like in the space necessarily, that as they were listening. So, and you don't know, like, something else could happen in their life and you may never find out, but it is that ripple effect. Couple of weeks down the line, couple of months down the line, is there going to be a situation in their life that comes up that makes them go like, oh, wait, I remember that really annoyed me at the time, but now that this has happened, maybe I need to rethink it. Like, it's all important. Even so much of it we don't see, and so much of what we don't see is probably the most powerful, like, messaging that we put out there.
Definitely. This is one of the most valued conversations I've had on this podcast yet so far. I really do appreciate you joining me on here.
I've had such a good time. I love it.
I'm sure there's so much more to hear from you.
I could talk forever. You have to put a cap on that.
I encourage anyone to follow what you're doing on Instagram, on social media, and check out your art, check out your poetry. But one final question for you that I'd like to get to. If you could go back to when you was in that dark place, and you could go back in time and speak to that person, what would you say to them now?
Just keep going. Like, I wouldn't even say I'm out of it. I think you're never really out of it. It's just life, and it's constantly evolving, and it's naive to think there's never going to be anything else. There is. It's just going to be different. But I think in that moment where she's down the side of the bed and hiding and reading that blog, I think that woman, I think something in me, something in her knew that I had what it took to survive. and that it would be worth it. Yes, it's going to hurt, but you are brave enough. You have courage, and I think there's a difference between bravery and courage. And like it isn't bravery if you're not scared, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just fearlessness, and that's a whole other situation. But no matter how scared I was, I think I always knew that I was gonna survive, that I was gonna, and not just survive, but I always had this kind of underlying hope that there was something more and that it would mean something. And I think it does.
Thank you, Louise.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Louise the Phoenix.
Next time I see you, I'm going to have a tattoo. I probably won't still. I have so many in my mind that I just have not got the money for.
We'll see. So, and thank you for anyone listening or watching. Thank you for joining us in this conversation. If you'd like to find out more about the BTS Creative Academy, you can just search. What would they search? BTS Creative Academy. So. Yeah, really simple, isn't it?
That's quite obvious
when you think about it. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on any future conversations.
Yeah, I will be doing so from now on. And I'll be interested to go back through the back catalogue.
Wonderful.
Love me a good conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That was the BTS Creative Academy podcast, Uncut.